The air in the Moretti penthouse was kept at a constant, clinical 68 degrees, cold enough to remind everyone that the man who owned it had ice in his veins. Dante Moretti stood at the glass, watching the lightning arc over the Atlantic. He was a billionaire by day and a judge, jury, and executioner by night. He had everything money could buy and nothing that could make him sleep through the night. Zara Okoro moved through the penthouse like a soft breeze, her presence marked only by the scent of lemon oil and the faint rustle of her uniform. She was a ghost with a 4 GPA, a woman whose true life was hidden in textbooks and hospital bills. She lived by one rule: don't be noticed. Then the world went black. A grid failure plunged Manhattan into a terrifying, silent void. In the pitch-dark hallway, two lonely souls collided. In that vacuum, titles stripped away, there was no boss, no maid, only the desperate need for human warmth. The mistake they made in the dark was a collision of stars. But by morning, as the first hitman breached the perimeter, Dante realized that the woman he had slept with wasn't just a maid. She was the most brilliant tactical mind he had ever met. The one-night stand was over. The alliance for survival had just begun.
Before we continue, we welcome you to Afro-Korean love thrillers, the home of dark romance, forbidden passion, power, betrayal, and captivating revenge stories. Please do me a favor. Tap that comment section and tell us quickly where you are watching from. Stay tuned. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel so you don't miss any new thriller that drops here. Sit back and relax because this story is just getting started. Now let's get back to our story.
The penthouse atop the Moretti Tower didn't feel like a home. It felt like a vault. Floor-to-ceiling glass overlooked a Manhattan that lay prostrate at Dante Moretti's feet, but inside, the air was sterile and silent. Dante stood by the window, his reflection a sharp, jagged edge against the city lights. At 36, he was a man of absolute discipline and zero warmth. To the world, he was a visionary billionaire. To the underworld, he was the Obsidian, the final word in any conflict. He adjusted a cufflink worth more than most people earned in a decade, his mind already calculating the logistics of a shipment that would finalize his dominance over the eastern seaboard. 20 feet away, Zara Okoro moved like a phantom. She wore the charcoal gray uniform of the domestic staff, her eyes fixed firmly on the white marble floor. To Dante, she was a non-entity, a cog in the machine that kept his life seamless. He didn't know that under that humble apron was a woman who spent her nights studying advanced game theory and neuroeconomics. He didn't know her father's heart was failing in a Lagos hospital, and every floor she scrubbed was a heartbeat bought for him. "The study is clear, Mr. Moretti," Zara whispered, her voice low and neutral, a skill she had perfected to avoid his icy gaze. Dante didn't turn. He didn't acknowledge her presence. He simply raised a hand, a silent command for her to vanish. He lived in a world where mercy was a liability and people were tools. But as he watched a distant storm cloud roll in over the Hudson, he felt a strange, cold shiver. He was a king in a fortress of glass, unaware that the foundation was about to shatter, and the ghost, currently exiting his room, was the only thing that could save him from the dark. The storm that had been brewing over the Hudson didn't just break, it detonated. Lightning fractured the sky, turning the glass walls of the penthouse into a strobe light of cold electricity. Then, the impossible happened. The unbreakable Manhattan grid flickered once, hummed with a dying metallic groan, and vanished. The 60 stories of Moretti Tower were swallowed by a darkness so absolute it felt physical. In the master wing, the backup generators failed to kick in, a detail Dante would later realize was the first sign of sabotage. Dante stood paralyzed in the center of the pitch-black suite. For a man who ruled through vision and surveillance, blindness was a sudden, violent vulnerability. The Obsidian King felt a rare, jagged spike of panic. He began to move toward the door, his hand outstretched, searching for a wall, a desk, anything solid. At the same moment, Zara was navigating the hallway, guided by her memory of the floor plan. She rounded the corner of the master's suite just as Dante lunged forward. They collided with a force that sent them both staggering. "Who's there?" Dante rasped, his voice stripped of its usual iron. He didn't let go. In the void, Zara didn't feel like a servant, she felt like a life raft. "It's Zara, sir," she whispered, her breath warm against his neck. The coldness that had defined Dante's life for a decade shattered. In the silence of the blackout, the titles of Billionaire and Maid evaporated. There was only the scent of lemon and rain, the sound of the storm, and the desperate, primal need to be held by another human being. Driven by the adrenaline of the dark and a sudden, shared loneliness, Dante pulled her closer. For one night, the rules of the world were suspended. In the heart of the fortress, the ghost and the king found a fire that had nothing to do with power and everything to do with survival. The return of the power was more violent than its departure. At 5:14 a.m., the penthouse surged back to life with a clinical hum of electricity. The recessed LED lights flared, bathing the master's suite in an unforgiving white glow. Dante woke instantly, the cold reality of his world rushing back. He looked down at Zara, asleep beside him, her skin like dark silk against his charcoal sheets. And for the first time in his life, he felt a crushing weight of regret that had nothing to do with business. He was a man who didn't make mistakes, yet he had just compromised the one person in his house who was supposed to be invisible. Zara stirred, her eyes fluttering open. The moment her gaze met Dante's, the air left the room. The maid and the king were back, and the chasm between them was wider than ever, now filled with the shame of a boundary crossed. Before she could speak, Dante's internal alarm, a silent vibration on his wrist, went off. Someone had bypassed the elevator security. "Stay down," Dante hissed, his voice returning to its razor-edge obsidian tone. He reached into the nightstand for the beretta he kept there, but his hand found only air. The drawer was empty. From the shadows of the walk-in closet, a figure emerged, a silent cleaner in tactical black, a suppressed pistol aimed at Dante's heart. The hitman didn't hesitate, but neither did Zara. While Dante was reaching for a weapon that wasn't there, Zara grabbed a heavy obsidian sculpture from the bedside table and hurled it with the precision of a trained athlete. The distraction was only a second, but a second was all the obsidian needed. Dante tackled the man, the two of them crashing through a glass partition. By the time the guards burst into the room, the assassin was neutralized, and Dante was standing over him, blood on his knuckles. He turned to look at Zara, who was clutching the silk sheets to her chest, her breathing ragged. He didn't see a maid anymore. He saw the only person in the world who had looked at him and seen a man worth saving. The debt had shifted. The aftermath of the attack turned the penthouse into a war room. Dante's security chief, a hardened man named Silas, was frantic, analyzing the breached codes on a holographic display. "They didn't just bypass the elevator, sir. They rewrote the algorithm of the entire building's security grid in under 6 minutes. This wasn't a street hit. It was a ghost-level hack." Dante paced the marble floor, his mind a jagged mess of paranoia and adrenaline. He looked toward Zara, who sat at the edge of a velvet chair. She was no longer in her uniform, but wrapped in one of his oversized black silk robes, looking small but strangely composed. Her eyes weren't on the guards, they were fixed on the security monitors. "The breach didn't start at the elevator," Zara said, her voice quiet but carrying a sudden, analytical weight that stopped Silas in his tracks. Dante turned, his brow furrowed. "What did you say?" "You're looking at the wrong data point," she continued, standing up and walking toward the screen. She pointed to a series of flickering red lines. "That's a decoy loop. They didn't hack the elevator. They manipulated the HVAC pressure sensors to trick the system into a fail-safe reset. Whoever did this knows the game theory behind your 0-point defense. They used your own logic against you." Dante felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. He had spent months ignoring a woman who possessed a mind capable of dismantling his empire. Silas opened his mouth to dismiss her, but Dante raised a hand. "Silas, get out," Dante commanded, his eyes never leaving Zara. "Everyone out now." When the room cleared, the silence was heavy. Dante walked toward her, stopping just inches away. "You're a doctoral student in game theory. I checked your file 6 months ago. I thought it was a hobby. I didn't realize I had a tactical genius scrubbing my floors." "I needed the money, Dante," she said, using his name for the first time, her gaze steady. "My father doesn't have time for me to be discovered." Dante leaned in, his voice dropping to a low, lethal hum. "From this moment on, you aren't a maid. You're my consultant. You stay in this suite. You eat at my table. And you tell me exactly who is smart enough to use my own mind to try and kill me." The transition from maid to consultant was a jarring shift in the penthouse's ecosystem. Zara was no longer moving through the shadows. She was seated at the head of the Obsidian conference table, her laptop open next to Dante. But as the days bled into a week of high-tension strategy, a different kind of shadow began to loom over her. It started as a dull ache, then a wave of nausea that hit every time the scent of Dante's morning espresso filled the room. Zara tried to dismiss it as the lingering adrenaline of the assassination attempt, or perhaps the sudden change in her diet, but her body knew better. She was a scientist by nature. She dealt in data and biological certainty. While Dante was in the gym, venting his frustration on a heavy bag, Zara slipped into the sleek marble bathroom of the guest suite. The silence in the room felt deafening as she waited for the results of the test she had smuggled in through a sympathetic grocery courier. When the two pink lines appeared, the world didn't just tilt, it vanished. She wasn't just a tactical ally or a girl from a one-night mistake anymore. She was carrying the heir to the Moretti Empire, a bloodline built on violence, now growing inside a woman who wanted nothing more than peace. She walked back into the main living area, her face a mask of calculated neutrality, but Dante was already there, his shirt damp with sweat, his eyes scanning her face with the predatory intensity he used to spot a lie. He noticed the slight tremor in her hands, the way she stood a fraction of an inch differently. "You're pale, Zara," he said, stepping into her space, his voice surprisingly soft. "The stress of the hunt is getting to you." "I'm fine, Dante," she lied, her mind already calculating the variables of his reaction. If she told him, she would never be free. If she didn't. She was putting the child in the middle of a war zone. Dante reached out, his hand hovering near her waist before he pulled it back, the memory of their night still a raw electric current between them. He didn't know that in that moment. He wasn't just looking at his best weapon against his enemies. He was looking at his future. The transformation was absolute. The charcoal gray uniform was replaced by a custom-tailored gown of shimmering emerald silk that clung to Zara's curves like a second skin. Dante had summoned the city's finest stylists to the penthouse, but he had chosen the jewelry himself, a necklace of raw, uncut emeralds and black diamonds that felt like a collar of cold fire around her neck. "This is a mistake," Zara whispered, staring at her reflection. She looked like a queen, but she felt like bait. "It's a necessity," Dante replied, appearing behind her in the mirror. He was dressed in a tuxedo of midnight wool, looking every bit the merciless Obsidian king. "The families think I'm weak because I was attacked in my own home. They think I'm hiding. Tonight, we show them I haven't just recovered. I've found something more valuable than their territories." He stepped closer, his hand resting on the small of her back. The touch sent a jolt of electricity through her, complicated by the secret she was still carrying beneath the emerald silk. The gala was held in a converted cathedral in Lower Manhattan, a den of high-society monsters and underworld royalty. As they entered, the music didn't stop, but the atmosphere curdled. Heads turned, and whispers spread like a virus. The ghost had brought a guest, a black woman who moved with a grace and intelligence that made the debutantes look like dolls. Throughout the night, Zara played her part with clinical precision. She stood by Dante's side, her tactical mind memorizing faces, lip-reading conversations across the room, and identifying the hidden holsters under tailored jackets. She wasn't just a consort, she was his radar. However, the golden cage felt smaller with every passing hour. Rival bosses approached, their compliments tasting like poison. They looked at Zara not as a person, but as Dante's first-ever vulnerability. For the first time, Dante found himself losing focus on the business of the syndicate. His eyes kept darting to Zara, his protective instinct overriding his predatory nature. He wasn't just guarding an ally anymore. He was guarding the only light he had ever allowed into his dark world, unaware that the snakes in the room were already smelling the change in his blood. The high of the gala was short-lived, replaced by the suffocating tension of a house divided. Back at the penthouse, the air felt thin. Dante was obsessed with the data Zara had gathered at the event, but Zara was focused on a different kind of data. The shifting behavior of Silas, Dante's longtime head of security. Zara's tactical mind had noticed it first. The way Silas lingered near the encrypted servers, the slight delay in his response times, the way his eyes avoided hers. He didn't see a genius. He saw an outsider who had compromised his master. "Dante, the security logs from the gala have been purged," Zara said, her voice tight as she sat at the console. "Not by a hack, but by an internal override code." Dante froze, his glass of scotch halfway to his lips. "That's impossible. Only I have that code, and Silas." Before the realization could fully settle, the lights didn't flicker, they went red. The emergency sirens began a low, rhythmic throb that felt like a heartbeat. Silas stepped into the room, his weapon drawn, but it wasn't aimed at the door. It was aimed at Zara. "She's the poison, Dante," Silas hissed, his face twisted with a fanatical loyalty turned sour. "You've gone soft because of her. You're trading an empire for a maid. The council doesn't want a king who follows his heart. They want the Obsidian back." The betrayal cut deeper than any blade. Silas wasn't just an employee. He was the man who had stood by Dante since the Busan days of his father's reign. But Silas wasn't alone. Behind him, the monitors showed the elevator bay swarming with cleaners wearing the insignia of the rival Vane family. Silas hadn't just rebelled, he had sold the keys to the kingdom. "Move away from her, sir," Silas commanded. "We take her, and the Vanes leave you the tower. It's the only way to save what you built." Dante didn't move away. He stepped in front of Zara, his body a shield of midnight wool. He looked at the man he had trusted for a decade and saw a ghost. "You think I built this empire for the council?" Dante's voice was a lethal, quiet vibration. "I built it so I would never have to lose anything again, and you just tried to take the only thing that matters." In that moment of ultimate betrayal, Zara felt a sharp cramp in her abdomen, a reminder of the fragile life she carried. She realized then that the one-night stand was no longer a secret mistake. It was the spark of a war that would either forge a family or bury them all in the rubble of the Moretti Tower. The first explosion rocked the penthouse, shattering the reinforced glass and sending a gale of midnight air howling through the suite. Silas fired, but Dante was already a blur of motion, pulling Zara behind the massive obsidian desk as the room disintegrated into a hail of drywall and splinters. The Obsidian King didn't call for backup. He knew the men in the halls now belonged to the highest bidder. "The service elevator is rigged, and the stairs are a kill zone," Zara shouted over the roar of the alarms, her mind racing through the building's schematics. "Dante, the window-washing rig on the north face, it's on an independent power loop." Dante looked at the 60-story drop and then at Zara. He saw no fear in her, only the cold, sharp brilliance that had saved him once before. He grabbed a tactical submachine gun from a hidden compartment under the desk and handed Zara a vest. "Put this on. If we stay, we're a tomb. If we jump, we're a ghost story." They sprinted through the wreckage, Dante providing cover fire as cleaners breached the master suite. Every floor below them was a hive of betrayal. They reached the exterior ledge just as the rig lurched into motion. As they descended the side of the skyscraper, suspended by nothing but steel cables and adrenaline, the city below looked like a sea of predatory lights. Zara leaned against Dante, her hand instinctively shielding her stomach as the wind whipped around them. She could feel his heart hammering against her back, not with the panic of a victim, but with the rhythmic, steady beat of a man who had finally found something worth fighting for. By the time the rig hit the 20th floor, the Vane hitmen had spotted them. Bullets sparked off the metal frame of the lift. Dante didn't flinch. He used the last of his thermal charges to blow the glass of an executive office, swinging Zara inside just as the rig's cables were severed. They were 20 stories up, trapped in a building that had turned into a vertical labyrinth of fire and steel. The escape wasn't just about leaving the tower. It was about Zara surviving the night so she could carry the future Dante never thought he deserved. The transition from the burning skyscraper to the cold, industrial docks of New Jersey felt like descending into a different circle of hell. Dante and Zara were cornered in a hollowed-out shipping warehouse, the smell of salt and rust heavy in the air. Outside, the headlights of a dozen black SUVs cut through the fog, forming a semicircle of predatory light. Director Vane, the architect of the coup, stepped into the warehouse. He didn't come with a gun, he came with a contract. Behind him, Silas stood like a shamed dog, holding a tablet that flickered with the digital codes of the Moretti Empire, bank accounts, cargo manifests, and the keys to the shadow grid. "It's over, Dante," Vane shouted, his voice echoing off the corrugated metal. "You're trapped, but I'm a businessman. Give me the biometric overrides to the Zurich accounts, and I'll let the girl walk. You can even keep enough to live out your days in some third-world hole. Or you can die as the Obsidian, and I'll make sure she's buried in the foundation of your new tower." Dante looked at Zara. She was bruised, her emerald gown torn and stained with soot, but her eyes were still fires of intelligence. She shook her head, a silent plea for him not to surrender the power he had spent a lifetime building. She knew that without his empire, Dante Moretti was a dead man walking. But Dante looked at her hand, the way it rested protectively over her womb. He saw the future he had caught a glimpse of in the dark of a blackout, a future that was worth more than 1,000 glass towers. For the first time in his life, the man who had no mercy showed it to himself. "The overrides are in the cloud," Dante said, his voice a low, hollow rasp. He pulled a small, encrypted drive from his pocket and tossed it into the dirt at Vane's feet. "Take it all. The ships, the towers, the blood money, everything." Vane smirked, signaling his men to lower their weapons. The great Obsidian, brought to his knees by a maid, how the world will laugh. "I'm not on my knees, Vane," Dante replied, stepping toward Zara and pulling her into the crook of his arm. "I'm just finally standing on solid ground." As they were allowed to walk into the darkness of the docks, Dante felt the weight of his empire lift, replaced by the terrifying, beautiful weight of a woman's hand in his. He had paid the ultimate price, but as he looked at Zara, he knew he had finally made the best trade of his life. The world watched the Moretti Tower burn on the morning news, and by noon, the headlines confirmed what the underworld already whispered. Dante Moretti was dead, lost in a fiery explosion at the Jersey docks. To Director Vane and the council, the Obsidian was a memory, a ghost vaporized by his own weakness. But ghosts don't stay quiet. Hidden in a windowless basement apartment in Queens, the kind of place the old Dante wouldn't have used to store his trash, the king was being reborn as a phantom. Zara sat across from him, her doctoral training in game theory now serving as their primary weapon. While Vane was busy celebrating his new empire, he hadn't noticed that the biometric overrides Dante surrendered were actually a Trojan horse. "Every time Vane moves $1 of your old money, he's pinging our location and opening a backdoor into his own private servers," Zara explained, her fingers dancing across a decrypted laptop. "He thinks he's spending your fortune, but he's actually mapping out his entire network for us. We don't need an army, Dante. We just need to pull the right thread." Dante watched her, a strange sense of peace settling over him. He spent his nights not in boardrooms, but in the shadows of the city he once owned, moving like a wraith. He dismantled Vane's supply lines, intercepted his communications, and sowed seeds of paranoia among the other families. He wasn't the butcher anymore. He was a surgeon, cutting out the rot. One evening, after a successful digital raid that froze Vane's primary offshore accounts, Zara stood by the small, cracked window of their hideout. "He knows someone is alive, Dante. He's scared." Dante walked over and stood behind her, his hands resting gently on her shoulders. For the first time, he let himself feel the slight curve of her stomach, the physical evidence of the life they had created in the midst of death. "Let him be scared," Dante whispered. "A man who fears a ghost is already halfway in his grave. We aren't fighting for a throne anymore, Zara. We're clearing the path for someone else." As the ghost of Moretti prepared his final strike, he realized that faking his death had been the only way to truly start living. He was no longer a king. He was a guardian, waiting for the moment the world forgot his name so he could finally be a father. 2 years later, the name Morty had become a whispered myth in New York, a ghost story told to ambitious young men who thought they could rule the world. The syndicate had eaten itself alive after the ghost, dismantled its foundations, leaving Director Vane to a life of permanent imprisonment and the Morty Tower to be rebranded as a public library. On the sun-drenched coast of a quiet island in the Mediterranean, the air didn't taste of unlit tobacco or electric tension. It tasted of sea salt and wild jasmine. Dante, now known simply as David to the local villagers, stood on the porch of a modest white stone villa. Gone were the tailored Italian suits and the obsidian rings. He wore a simple linen shirt, his hands calloused from tending to the olive grove that bordered their property. He watched Zara walking up from the beach, her mahogany skin glowing under the golden hour sun. She looked vibrant, the academic ghost of the penthouse replaced by a woman who moved with absolute, earned sovereignty. In her arms, she carried a toddler with Dante's dark, sharp eyes and Zara's defiant spirit. "He found a crab," Zara laughed as she reached the porch, holding up their son Leo, whose small hands were covered in sand. "He's already trying to figure out how its shell works. I think we have another strategist on our hands." Dante reached out, taking the boy from her. He looked at the child, the living evidence of a night that was supposed to be a mistake, a night that had cost him a multi-billion-dollar empire and gave him a soul in return. He pressed a kiss to Zara's forehead, the connection steady and deep, no longer fueled by the adrenaline of survival, but by the quiet certainty of home. "Let him learn," Dante said softly, his voice finally free of its jagged, obsidian edge. "As long as he knows that the strongest thing he can ever build isn't a tower, but a life where he doesn't have to hide." As the sun dipped behind the turquoise horizon, casting long, peaceful shadows across the garden, Zara rested her head on Dante's shoulder. The billionaire who had no mercy had found it in the arms of the woman he once didn't see. The one-night stand hadn't just changed their lives, it had ended a cycle of blood. The king was gone, the maid was free, and in the silence of the island, they finally heard the only sound that mattered, the laughter of their future.
If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe. It really helps the channel grow and lets you know when new videos drop. Lastly, and turn on notifications so you never miss a video.